Hello and welcome to another week of the Storied Arcs podcast. I am your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And today we are covering Velvet Volume 3, The Man Who Stole the World.
Issues 11 through 15. At this point, we'll talk about it later, but at this point, the end of the story, even though at the time it wasn't intended to be the end, but we're coming up on 6.5 years of this now. So what do you think to say? It's probably the end. But at least we get to a conclusion. There's no major cliffhanger, but it's obviously set up for there's more story.
Yeah, I had always heard, both in other people's reviews and in a comment you made in the Zero, that it kind of has like a soft ending.
Yes.
And I think they did the ending in such a way that they certainly leave it open to more, but I'm completely satisfied with the resolution of this 3-volume story arc.
Yes, the story they were telling is wrapped like that, like it was arced in a 3-part play, and then but it ends in a spot of like, well, there's larger things going on here. There's more to this world. There are more stories you can tell. Just like there are always more Bond stories. There are always more spy stories.
Right. Yeah. No. And now she's kind of off the books.
Yeah.
She'd be a rogue agent type thing, and there's so many good stories there.
And we know the people that are left at Arc 7, like Colt knows she's alive. The current was it hold on, I'm blanking on his name now. Hold on, let me look at notes real quick.
What? Wait. Let me guess. Was it a white guy?
Yeah. Well, they're all white guys. It's the 70s.
I know. That's fine.
Not Roberts. No, it is Robert. No, not Robert Stiles.
Was it was it the blue caption, the yellow caption, or the white caption boxes?
Well, it was the guy who takes over for Director Manning. They basically the new director.
Yeah.
They have that cryptic conversation, where he susses out that she's alive, obviously, and that Colt knows and helped her, and Colt's like, I don't know what you're talking about, which is the clear sign of like, yes, I know. So this idea that almost in a way that that the further adventures of Velvet could be her being essentially what she was trying to be recruited into, because as we find out, the twist there is that Director Manning isn't dead. He's working with Damian Lake the whole time, and that they are a secret organization within a secret organization, like they work in the espionage world, but they feel that's too limiting, so they do their own thing to try and influence world events, things like that. She could almost be that character for the front-facing Arc 7, because she is dead. She could be that ghost character. So yeah, the idea, you're right. The idea of her, a spy coming out of retirement, quote unquote, or faking their own death or whatever, and being and being the person that doesn't exist, and able to do what kind of missions they can do, what kind of things they can do because of that. It's almost like she's in a position to do the thing that she was being recruited into at the end, that she ultimately rejected. But if there was more story, and again, at the end of issue 15, at the time, it seemed like all plans were that they were going to have more story. It never came to fruition.
Yeah, I guess reading it in trade, knowing that there's only the 3 trades and it's been out for a while.
Yeah,
you have different expectations.
Yeah,
and I think,
and if you read it in the complete, the deluxe oversize, the complete,
right,
you understand it's one story. So
I think this is like, honestly, this is a lot like The Good Asian, where it's like, the story you were reading is wrapped, but you're like now like, okay, but I would like read more of this character. Like, will you like, this seems like one of many adventures of this character.
Yeah.
And I would read a lot more of them. Now, you said something interesting. You said, obviously she's still alive, when they were discussing that. And I was like, well, that was what I thought at the end of issue 14. And then I remembered, I thought that in Kill or Be Killed, but the character was actually dead.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, Brubaker does love a fake out, but
this preceded, this does precede Kill or Be Killed. So
right. But I was like, he's not above killing a main character
No, no,
in
no,
the
he's actually
series.
not. No.
Um, so I was like, I can't take that for granted. Although the fact that people were clamoring for issue 16
Yep.
would suggest to me that, which, that's another one. Good Asian had a fake out death where
Mhm.
it was, I think,
Mhm.
I mean, there's almost a whole issue or a whole issue where it went without Edison,
Well,
and
yeah, because
you
they
were like
they
led to believe like, oh,
yeah,
maybe he is out of the
yeah.
picture.
Well, then and that's when they pulled the face change and things like that. The that very specific
The face off.
noir trope. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, but yeah, no, it comes down to um I really do think they created a compelling character, and I was going to say they created a compelling world for her to live in and exist in. But
Well, I
as
want
we
to talk
find
to you
out,
about that.
well, yeah, as we find out in this third, and I that was the first thing on my notes too, found in this final volume that it's not just our world in the way that like Mission Impossible is supposed to be in quote unquote our world. Like they tie it specifically into historical events. Like
Right. When they
Watergate is
said
the
Watergate, it was like bum
yeah,
bum bum, and it was
yeah,
the end
yeah.
of 13 or something, and it was
Yeah,
like,
that was the end of an issue. So I'll ask you since this was a reread for me, and then I'll go through how I re experienced that because it's been a while since I've revisited the story up until now. But for you reading it through the first time, like when you get to that, and then obviously you don't have to wait a couple months for the next issue, you can keep going. But what were your thoughts in terms of seeing that this whole plot, this whole story is at least in some ways tangentially tied to a very specific actual real world event?
yeah. So I think that one in particular, it feels a little. I've mixed feelings. Is a short answer. It feels a little Forrest Gumpy, to just conveniently drop
Yeah.
things into reality. Although I will say, it's interesting.
Which would mean that like our characters were in the same. I mean, like Forrest Gump was at the Watergate Hotel too. I mean, like so like all
I
these
mean, and
forces.
those are the kind of games that, yeah,
Yeah,
you can go on forever with that. And if Velvet gets really good at ping pong, she'll play
yeah,
Forrest and that, yeah.
yeah.
Um, but so my favorite podcast of all time is the West Wing Weekly. Probably because the West Wing is my favorite show of all time, and I thought Rishikesh Hirway and Josh Molina were excellent on that podcast, and they both loathe tying anything to real world. Like I remember there was a point in like post Sorkin era where a character goes on Hardball with Chris Matthews. And they were like, oh, it just took me totally out of it. Like there was a fictionalized version of Hardball in the earlier seasons.
Yes.
And they're like, they should have just stuck with that. And I was like, I don't know. I mean, first of all, if anyone's watching the series for the first time now, which many, many people are, Hardball with Chris Matthews might seem fictionalized because I don't think that many people remember that show. Um, at the time, I was like, oh, that's kind of, it's kind of cool. And I really liked season one of The Newsroom, until those hosts really like ruined, they were like, you're tying the show into real world events, and, it's just sloppy world building and whatever. I'm like, I don't know. I kind of like it. They weren't, it's not like they, you know, it's not like the Newsroom brokered peace in the Middle East or anything. It was like, no, this is
Well,
just one more cable network commenting on current events.
I guess that I was not a fan of the Newsroom. Mainly because like I mean like in the pilot episode, like they break the news about BP and the oil spill because like one of the characters' sister knew somebody, and so like it was coincidence that they broke the news versus like what actually happened, which was like months and months and months of the Times Picayune, like doing actual journalism to, so it's those kinds of things where
The
like,
serendipitous things where
yeah,
it's
yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah. Well, if we're tying into these events, then like, then like show them as they happen, and don't. I don't know. When you do it in that way, where you're like you got the shortcut to the end versus what actually happened, which is like the actual journalism work that your show allegedly is supposed to be like championing. Like there are issues with that, and I'm also not a fan of that. Like it does take me out of a story, and as you were talking, I mentioned the example I just said couple minutes ago was about how, Mission Impossible is our world, but not really our world. And then I just thought back
Except Wolf
to
Blitzer. Yeah.
when you mentioned Hardball, I was like, oh damn, they did the Wolf Blitzer gag.
Right.
But
And it's
outside,
like,
yeah,
I don't know if they said the name Wolf Blitzer or if it was just Wolf Blitzer being another news anchor, a
yeah,
Wolf
but he was
Blitzer type person.
I mean, he was clearly in the situation. Like
It was
the
the
whole gag,
CNN.
yeah,
Yeah.
the whole gag was it was Wolf. You're supposed to know it's Wolf Blitzer. And yeah, stuff like that does take me out. And I was thinking about in specifics to the
I mean, the
spy genre.
record scratch one for me is Iron Man 2 has the O'Reilly factor playing, and it has like Bill O'Reilly. And it's like
Well, I mean,
Bill O'Reilly was
the
removed
first
from
Iron
that
Man had
job for
Jim
like
Cramer
sexual
too.
misconduct.
Yeah,
That's true. And Jim Cramer was a bad choice as
yeah,
well,
the
for
Mad
different
Money
reasons.
segment.
But
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So it was just like, really, Kevin Feige, like those two you let slip past the goal. And they're both like phase one mistakes that I think they wouldn't have made in phase two. Like when they made Iron Man 1, there was no such thing as the MCU. They planted seeds to see what they might be able to harvest later, but they weren't really thinking through like,
Well, but they
oh,
were
we're
they were
building
also
out a whole
they were also
universe.
trying to ground it in our world. They're trying to show this was our world. And what I was getting at was I was thinking about the spy genre, and I was thinking specifically about James Bond and how those movies are also ostensibly set in our world, but there aren't any markers for it to be set in our world.
Right.
And then I remembered in Casino Royale, M has a
No.
single line where she references 9/11 because they're talking about the stock. She says, she says like, when they analyze the stock market after 9/11, something about airline short, like someone made $1 billion on 9/12, shorting airline stocks or whatever. So the idea that the attacks on 9/11 weren't just the attack, but someone was also playing a larger game, and that led them to, that gets them off the ground for the opening of that movie. But that's like, it sticks out as this one moment in the newer Bond franchise where that is tied to a specific time. This is now legitimately post 9/11. Now, anything after that, the other movies, they don't have those references in those ways. But just with the single line, it grounds you in a specific time and place. And again, for me, like something like that, it does take me out when the book has not made or the story has not made an effort
Yeah, I just think
to.
of it as a coincidence. Like, oh, something
Yeah,
happened on
yeah.
their 9/11 too.
Yeah, I mean, yes, that it happens to involve airplanes. I mean, like really, you know what you're doing when you put that in your movie when you are
Oh,
making Casino
sure.
Royale. So, and so what was interesting about this is I was thinking back to when I first read this, and I couldn't really remember if I liked it or not. This idea of tying it into Watergate, but what I found is I was rereading this Fauna volume, now for this reread. As I was going through it, I remembered all the twists, like all the spy twists, like going to the restaurant, finding the waitress there, having the Mexican standoff there with Max Dark and Damian Lake and all them. I remembered the twist that Lake was working with director Manning, and then Manning had faked his own death. I remembered all that stuff there. And I had no memory of the Watergate stuff until the end of that issue when the witness says, "Oh yeah, the hotel was at the Watergate," and then it all came back like I had repressed it. And I was like, "Oh damn it, that's right. She's gonna go to Gerald Ford, which is gonna lead her to kidnapping the president Nixon." It's like, "Oh damn it," And of course, they don't say it. You see their names in the newspapers, but you know, at no point does she say any of their names. She talks about the newly appointed vice president. She talks
Right.
about no one ever says, she never addresses anyone by name. But it was like, oh crap, that's right. We're
Yeah,
we're
but
doing
like,
this Watergate thing. So
yeah,
it was
but
like
there's
I had
Watergate,
repressed all that stuff.
the art, and then saying because you're a crook.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
It
and,
was
and
like,
there are some newspapers in the back of panels where like Nixon not going to resign, so they name check him that way, but his name is never spoken. And same with Gerald Ford. And it was like, yeah, it's like, oh right, like it's like I had intentionally forgotten that because I didn't want to remember that part, you know, as to why she goes back to the States and following a lead and all that stuff. And it was kind of a shock reading again, being like, oh crap, here we go again. Got to do the issue or so where where she literally kidnaps the president. Which is a very, I mean, that's an Ethan Hunt thing.
Right.
That now we've kind of jumped a little bit of a genres here from the Bondish type thing, the whatever outlandish thing that Bond can do, we've now jumped into the outlandish thing that Ethan Hunt can do in Mission Impossible. That level of I don't know, trickery and guile and it's just there's an extra level, and I know we're supposed to understand that Velvet may be the best in the world at this, but still, the idea of like being able to kidnap the president like that in that way, I'm not saying that's a bridge too far for me. But again, the idea of just tying it into, like, if it had just been the president, fictional president of the United States in the 70s, I probably wouldn't have bumped it at all. But the fact that it was specifically Nixon and with specific regard to Watergate, and this whole thing tied back to the break-in, stuff like that can take me out of a story, and it did here for a little bit, and I was reminded of that reading it again, being like, oh yeah, like I can put myself back reading this at the time and thinking,
just rolling
really?
your eyes.
It was almost like it was like, oh really? Like, why? I was almost questioning why the decision was, why they felt the need to tie it to a specific time and a specific event. And of course, at the time too, then thinking there was going to be more Velvet, I was thinking, well, then what are they going to do next? Like, what's the next thing? Like, is the next arc going to tie into, I don't know, like Iran Contra? Like, I don't like, what are we doing here? Is she gonna be in Tehran when the embassy gets I didn't think about it. It didn't come to mind the Forrest Gumping of the story of these events, but like that was what my mind was doing, thinking of, well, if this first arc, if they're tying it into real world events and saying that this was a spy organization actually happening here, like kind of an alt history version, like it was almost like I was not worried, but almost thinking like, oh, well, then what's the next one going to be? Like, what's the next thing she's going to have encounter with?
Right. So I guess you're saying it's one step too far because, and I like the comparison because the color work between Breitweiser and Lee Lowridge remind me of each other. But compare this to The Good Asian, which is set in 1939 for a very specific reason.
Yeah.
Because of historical events, yet no historical figures are named.
Yes.
There are historical acts. Like, here's the Chinese Immigration Act of
1929.
29.
Exclusion Act.
The Exclusion Act. Yeah. Yes. The opposite of immigration.
Yeah.
The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1929. So I think I'm with you. Like, that doesn't bother you.
No,
non-specific. I mean, but that to me, that's one small step away from saying 9/11 happened in this universe, is to say the Chinese Exclusion Act happened. And we were both saying when we interviewed Pornsack, like, you and I both started scrolling forward in history in our minds saying like, okay, well, if this was 1939, is 1942 the next one? Is 1945 the next one?
Well, again, straight
exactly. To the 60s.
Exactly. The idea of, let's say we jump to the 40s and now we're talking about Japanese internment during World War II. That's an event that happened. So now you can build a story around that. That works. Because here what we have is we have the world, the universe that we know in the early 70s. What is that world like? Specifically, what is that world like for a woman, for someone in Velvet's position? Someone who had done what she had done and been taken out of that world, where now she is just a secretary, the thing that she is quote unquote supposed to be, So the idea of the gender politics involved, the socio-political climate, all of that stuff, that's the setting that you're in. But yeah, again, then just to and it's almost like, I don't know.
It's hard to put your finger on, but
no.
It seems like the specific line is at actual historical figures.
No. The specific line is the story being hinging on Watergate versus Watergate happening in the story. Like, the story could take place while Watergate and the investigation is happening, but the fact that that is the crux of everything, the reason why Agent X-14 was
Right. It's
killed.
not the wallpaper. They put the spotlight on it.
Yeah. Because
Yeah.
X-14 was in America and saw something he shouldn't have seen at the Watergate, which exposed what was happening in the larger sense of, again, what Director Manning was doing, and what that small cabal of kind of older generation spies, them trying to control and influence the world. Because that's what Watergate was going to be, right? That's what they said. It was a way to blackmail the president so they could control him and get the world to do the things, get the world moving in the direction that they thought it should be in, cutting through all the political red tape and all that stuff. So the idea that Watergate is a critical moment and an actual story beat, and a specific story beat, to where if you took Watergate out, you have to, you don't have a story. You have to replace it with something of what was Manning and Lake and all that. Like, what were they trying to accomplish?
Right.
Because Watergate was the thing that is based around. So yeah, it's the reliance on that specific historical event that I think takes me out of the story. I think so. Yeah, that
Right.
it's very defined, very specific,
And I think
very small focus.
That's consistent with your take on like the newsroom, right? It's like you used a very specific event. You could have called it the Marathon oil spill.
Yeah.
Had it be almost the exact same thing as what happened in our world.
Yeah.
But just tweak one thing so that it's technically different and you can find the scoop.
Which is what the West Wing effectively did. Yes, okay, using real life cable news things, whatever, but they never let the real world events affect the story specifically. They would take those ideas, take things from our real world, from our actual news, and find a way to imbue the spirit or the gist or the idea of that into the stories that they pulled in. Like 9/11 doesn't happen in the West Wing, but there's a 9/11 episode. There's a story about 9/11. It's just not about what happens with the World Trade Center. Like
Sure.
they address that stuff.
I mean, widely panned as one of the worst episodes, but yeah.
No, I'm not talking about that. I'm actually talking about.
Right. Oh, you're not talking about Isaac and Ishmael?
I'm talking about 20 Hours in America, which is one of the best episodes ever. That's the 9/11
that
episode.
does not get carried away.
That's the 20 Hours in America. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? The speech at the end, the one that Sorkin technically stole from Tom Hanks's Oscar speech, but still, the streets of heaven are too crowded with angels. Like that whole thing. That's the 9/11. That's the 9/11 episode.
The bombing at the school in Michigan.
In Iowa, Kansas State. Yeah. That is the 9/11. It was that's where they addressed the idea of 9/11.
That episode gets.
I'm sorry. That was the next season. I'm sorry. That was Isaac and Ishmael was the prelude to season 3. Sorry. Yeah.
You're talking about season 4. I gotta tell you that episode gets quoted a lot in my marriage, but it's not that speech at the end.
I don't like Mondays?
No. The when Sam is feeling totally helpless in the Oval Office and he's like, well, do I stand here or here or here? Like, I don't know anything about that meeting that's coming up. And Bartlett just slaps him on the shoulder and says, just rock and roll, Sam.
Rock and roll. Yeah.
We say that to each other all the time whenever we're feeling clueless about something. We're like, just rock and roll. It's like such a manager thing to say to someone who's like totally in over their head. So I don't know if you manage anyone at work, but
not in that way.
Sprinkle that one in.
But no, but again, so that's what the newsroom didn't do that the West Wing did, and if the West Wing had all of a sudden had an episode where an exact thing that happened in our world was reflected and shown as it happened in the show, like that would have been like that would have broken what the show was. I think. Now I think that actually was supposed to be a feature of the newsroom. I just think it wasn't, and I understand that. I just don't think it was handled well. That was like the whole gist of the newsroom. But when you have a story like this, that is just, okay, we're set in the world, our world in the 70s. And then just to bring that in and say, no, it was all Watergate the whole time. This is what it was about. It not saying it was out of left field, but to me as a reader, it felt like it's out of left field. It'd be like, and you're right, there's an eye rolly thing of like, oh, really? Like it had to be Watergate? Like, it couldn't have been
Like
something you
any other
made up.
hotel.
Yeah, or
Yeah.
it couldn't have been something that you made up because you've made up everything else. You've fictionalized, you've created this
Right.
whole world,
Right. Right.
this
Right.
whole
Right. You've
spy
made up a
network,
fake
all these different stations.
agency.
Yeah, all this
Um,
stuff here you've created and you've done, and all you have to say is, yeah, it's the Cold War. So we're talking about people in Russia, people in East Germany. You can do all these things and set it in the world that we're familiar with in this time frame, but just to put a pin on it on such a wildly specific moment in history. I feel that it's a story misstep because the story works just fine if you made something else up about the president, you know, with the same idea that they're trying to blackmail the president in order to control him because that's what they're trying to do inside their little breakaway sect of spies. That's what you need to get across. Instead, what comes across is it's all Watergate. Watergate dominates what that takes over what the story is about versus this idea of these spies thinking that they're the good guys because um they're hampered by the system. If only we had full control over everything, then we can make the world great. We can make the world right, which is again a very standard motivation for spies. People who are out in the world who see the way the world really is, and if only they could do the things they were allowed to do. Like that's such a spy trope, and it makes sense, and it fits the world that they've created. But just to be like, hey, we're gonna prove that by showing that we were, involved in Watergate. It's like, oh, come on, guys. That it felt like a story misstep to me.
yeah, I completely understand and respect that. I think I'm more willing to just hang with stuff like that where it's like, you know, I wouldn't have done it that way, but I'm willing to just accept it and see what you do with it. Because that's ultimately what storytelling is. It's like
And that's fair.
uh,
Yeah.
better world building is better, but good characters, good story is the
Yeah.
name of the game. So it's like, yeah, it could have been better with very little effort on your part. Um, but I'm not going to say like, that like it just totally, I can't, um, I just can't track with it anymore. It's like, no, no, no. I see what you're doing. And it did have like the shocking jaw dropping gasp moment when it was like, oh crap, that's Nixon.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
which I think is what he's going for. I
Well,
just,
yeah. Yeah.
it was for a different reason than I think he thought it
Well,
was.
yeah. I mean, you're right. There's a reason why Watergate is the last word in an issue.
And this
I mean,
isn't like, yeah, and
yeah.
this isn't plausibly, it's not conspiratorial saying like, oh, he really did these things and there is a secret world out there. Whereas like, just to call back to another book we've read, The Nightly News by Jonathan Hickman, that did have like a conspiracy theorist vibe to the whole book and was constantly citing stats.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's Hickman. It almost goes without
Yeah.
saying that there were infographics and stats and charts and stuff. Um, but he also wasn't putting forth a particular conspiracy theory for you to believe in
Yeah.
Hickman's
Yeah.
work.
Yeah. He was citing what you have to assume are real. I mean, he does cite the references at the time. So yeah, he's citing real world stats from our world and then formulating a story around that, saying that this is the world we live in. These stats are real here, but then he's not basing it what he's not basing his story off of an event that happened or an actual newscast or anything like that. He's not tying it in that way. So yeah, it's a fine line, and yeah, maybe I am just being too sensitive about it, because I can't admit ultimately it does work. It does show the thing they're trying to get across, which again is this idea that this spy network, they what their goal was. This idea of using blackmail, for lack of a better word, to try and influence world leaders, and to the point where in that final showdown with Velvet and Director Manning, when he's basically saying like, whether it's the Shah, why is it the Shah or it's or the like, I can't remember what he says, the Tsar or whatever. Why is that different than a president or a prime minister? And of course Velvet's like, well, because they're on our side. And his retort naturally is, well, are they? They're politicians. They're all the same. So if we can manipulate to force out a change in government or in a country that we think is hostile, like because they're not doing the things that we think they should be, like why can't we do the same thing for our quote unquote allies if we don't think they're doing the things that we think they should be doing? In his mind, it's all the same. And so the point is taken and it works in the story. Again, I think, but it takes me out of it. The fact that I just feel like maybe you could have done a fictionalized version, like just make up make up a different president, make a different scandal. There are plenty to choose from. So like, there's really no scandal you could do that would be like, well, that wouldn't happen in the presidency. Like, I think we're past that.
I mean, even not ascending it to the president. Like, if it had just been the director of the CIA,
yeah,
I can't name CIA directors. Like, even if you'd done a real CIA director, I wouldn't know.
Yeah, it's true.
Whereas, like, just to go back to,
well, yeah, okay, so no,
go
so
back
right
to,
there.
but go back to Iron Man, like, right? So Iron Man 1, you had the Jim Cramer thing. Iron Man 2, you had the Bill O'Reilly thing. Iron Man 3, you're President Ellis.
Yeah.
And it wasn't someone wearing like George Bush makeup. It wasn't someone wearing Bill Clinton. It's not, he wasn't trying to look like any particular president. This was their president.
He was the president,
United States.
Yes. And he's been the president for a while. Like he's in other movies.
Yeah. And I think that was when they figured out like, oh yeah, we don't want to hover too close to
the real world.
The real world.
Yeah. I was going to say, like,
but
they made up
like,
a senator.
Oh, what is this city that looks like New York City? Like, no. Yeah. New York City's broad enough. We can have New York City.
Exactly. Yeah.
But they didn't name drop like a specific shawarma restaurant.
Yeah.
So it's just like, it's the little tiny details here and there are where you can go amiss. But I guess that's what sets me apart from, I think, most modern readers. I think most modern readers pull their hair out when little things like this happen. And I do consider this ultimately a little thing because it's like, I can't imagine really enjoying the first 13 issues, finding out that Nixon is in it and tied to it, and being like, no, I can't enjoy any of this book anymore. It's all garbage.
Well, yeah.
And I know you're not saying that.
It doesn't ruin the book. Again, it's more just like, really, like it feels like the lazy story choice. Like we're gonna lean back on this thing that everybody knows about, and we're gonna say that it's actually a larger conspiracy, or there was more going on that you didn't even know about, And so,
right.
like I was just saying as you were talking there, but like they made up a senator. They made up a senator who's part of this group.
Yeah.
And so you've already introduced someone who doesn't exist, who would clearly have a role in a thing that does exist, more so than the shadowy spy agency. You created a U.S. senator, someone who would have been around and part of all of this, everything that's going around surrounding Watergate. And so you went that far. So why not just create, a whole new presidency, a whole new regime, all of that, and show that it's our world, but not quite. It's the same vibe, but it isn't our world. You're right. Or you just skip it by not making it the president.
Right. Wait,
you bypass that. Watergate still happens. Nixon, all that's going on in the background. You're right. That's the flavor of the world we're in, but that's not the story that we're in.
Right, but it doesn't have to go all the way to the top of everything.
Yeah. Velvet could still go back to the U.S. She could still specifically be in D.C. and the whole vibe around the city could be about what's happening with Watergate. But she's got her own thing going on because that's where her story is. And that could ground it and also not feel like it's reliant upon that. I think that's if the story had gone that way, I think I'd have no qualms with it whatsoever. Like I'd have no anger.
So I thought of a new thing. This is what I think kind of made it feel cheesy to me, which is like Nixon is so easy to vilify because he's like a villain.
Richard Nixon.
Yeah, right. He's like,
because he's him.
Yeah, right. That would be like, oh, I've got a big twist at the end of the story. You're not going to see it coming. Osama bin Laden.
Yeah.
He's a bad guy.
Bad dude.
It's like, wouldn't it have been so much more impact if you took someone who I think is universally accepted to be like a good person, regardless of his performance as president, like a Jimmy Carter, and you found out that Jimmy Carter,
Was behind the whole
right,
thing.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, if you're gonna do the thing, like actually add a twist to it, like
Like, take a wild swing.
yes, take a wild swing, make it actual fiction, rather than being like, I don't, if her organization existed and X-14 existed,
Yeah.
yeah, that's probably what Nixon would have done. I don't know. So I guess, yeah, I'm like,
That's it. That's
either
interesting.
make it, and like Carter
Yeah.
would read that if he ever read that and would chuckle. He'd be like, oh yeah, that's funny.
Well, I guess I could respect a choice like that because if it were something that was so obvious like
It's
that,
such a departure. Yeah. Even if
yeah,
you're
yeah,
using a real figure, it's
yeah.
clearly a fictionalized version of a real figure.
Or yeah, so now you've completely fictionalized the actual event. You're saying we're taking, yeah, as opposed to this where it is just tangential. As far as we know, everything that happened with the break-in and all that still happened. Everyone still resigned as is. It was simply that Arc 7 was there monitoring that. That they were going to tip off the police because they wanted this to get out there because they wanted to have Nixon under their thumb. So it wasn't like they instigated this. They didn't prevent it. They didn't start it, but they helped facilitate it because it was supposed to help their ends. But yeah, Watergate goes off as it did in actual history. So yeah, that would have been interesting if they'd said it's Watergate, but not, and yeah, made some really crazy swing at it.
Yeah, or if JFK, we're still,
yeah,
and it was JFK's thing. I don't know. So like, yeah, to me, that would have pushed it to the land of like Zoolander, right? Where they like
you now you're bordering on the
silly.
farcical. Yeah, you're butting up against a different kind of extreme there. But that potentially could have worked by saying,
but it's like my thing is it's silly either way. So the thing
fair.
is,
Yeah,
make it
that's fair.
intentionally silly.
Yeah, make it so obvious as to like remove all comparison and all examination of it. Maybe I think that's
right,
a fair
which
point.
would be like I don't know, like the Man in the High Castle version.
Kinda, yeah,
like did you ever read that book?
Yeah, like full complete alt history.
Yes,
Yeah,
it's alt history, and when you do it that way, it's like, oh, it's crazy how some things are inverted and some things aren't. It's like, yeah, that's basically. And now
yeah,
multiversal theory is like all it takes is one ingredient to be off, and it's a different universe.
yeah.
And I guess that's how I see most of these things. I'm like, oh, sure, well, like Watergate happened, Nixon happened, all that stuff, but Velvet exists, so it's one universe over from ours
Yeah. Well,
in the pantheon of
yeah,
infinite universes.
I guess that is true, except as far as we know, nothing changed with Watergate. Everything happened exactly as it did because all
Right.
these
There
operates
would
in the
be
shadows.
unlimited versions of universes where
Yeah,
everything happened the exact same with Watergate, and just as many versions where there were ripple effects that were completely different.
I mean that's one way to look at the multiverse. That's sure. Oh,
Well, it's the lazy man's way to look at the multiverse.
sure, yeah.
And if I'm nothing else, I'm incredibly lazy when it comes to multiversal thinking. So anyway, moving beyond that, but clearly we both had some baggage with that.
Yeah.
So that was supposed to be the big gasp, right? But then at the end of part 4, which I'm being sloppy with my issues here, but issue 14,
That's 14, yeah.
we see a burnt corpse, and
Yeah.
it's like, oh, it's Velvet.
Yeah.
I kind of mentioned this already. I didn't buy it for a second.
No, I don't think I don't think
Until I
think
put
you're
the book
supposed
down
to.
and came back to it, and I was like, wait a second. Then it jumps. Part 5 jumps. Oh no, wait, that is the beginning of part 5. It's 12 hours later. So she says, "Oh no, I'm dead," with a gun to her head.
Yeah.
At the end of part 4.
Yeah.
And part 5 opens
yeah,
12 hours later with her dead corpse.
yeah.
I mean, it's pretty well done.
And then we get the
fake out.
flashback, quote unquote, from Agent Colt there, where as he describes what happens, and then later revealed that it all happened that way with the exception of the missile, I guess, that came in that was supposed to blow up the car. And that's, then it's revealed that, oh no, she's still alive. But I mean, I don't think as a reader, you're supposed to believe she's dead at all. Like in this scenario with this type of character, Yeah, like you don't anticipate them to die. Like that's not that isn't in the cards for a character like this, for a story like.
Yeah, that's fair. I
Yeah.
guess I just had Kill or Be Killed on my brain, and I thought, well, he's tried it before. Um,
Well, tried it after again. Kill Be Kill came after this. Before from our standpoint, but
from my standpoint, yeah,
yeah, yeah.
mine only. I think you read both of these in real time. Um, in general, I did like this book.
Mhm.
Um, I I think the second volume was my favorite by a substantial margin. And between this one and the first one, I guess I still enjoyed this one because we had the split narration of like following the agent, another agent who's on her tail,
Mhm.
and following her, and we just got, a little more insight from that vantage point. But plot wise, I think this was the weak link.
I think so. I think so. But it's I agree. I think the second volume is probably the best volume. You're in the middle of the action, So the setup of who Velvet is and why you're past that, but it's all build up to whatever your conclusion is going to be. And so yeah, that middle chunk is I think narratively the best stuff. I think action wise some of the best stuff. So yeah, I'd probably, if I had to rank them, I'd probably go 2, 1, 3. But overall, as a
Is that
story,
also your original Star Wars ranking for the trilogy?
yeah,
Two,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
I was
yeah,
like,
yeah,
what else is 2, 1, 3?
yeah.
Um,
I'm not gonna say everything is, but a lot of times that middle story where you're not worried about a beginning or an end per se, and you can
mhm.
just tell like here's the cool stuff that happens in the story. There's some freedom there, I think.
I
But
think
again,
that's probably your Captain America rankings too. 2, 1, 3, because you're not a big Civil War guy.
yeah, Civil War's got problems.
So you're
But
probably a
but
two,
but
one, three. And Winter
yeah,
Soldier is obviously
yeah, but then like First Avengers, like a totally different movie. Like that's a period piece. That's almost it's hard to compare to other. But yeah, like it probably would be 2, 1, 3 for Captain America too. Not Iron Man though. Iron Man would probably be 1, 2
yeah.
because the first Iron Man,
First, yeah, I just rewatched it recently when
the
I was
first Iron
sleep
Man's really
deprived,
good. It's
and
really solid.
totally holds
So
up.
yeah,
I enjoy every second of it,
no.
and Robert Downey Jr. is captivating. I
Probably go
will
2, 1, 2 for
say
the Godfather as well too.
I did 2, 1, 3 for The Godfather.
Yeah, I like two the
I
best.
get
Yeah.
it. Yeah. Um, I will. I really enjoy how much she busted out like the flying squirrel suit.
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was like
There's a lot in this one. A lot of flying.
a lot, right? I was like, this seems like a once per volume trope,
Well, I,
and she's
I think
busting
that
this out that
this
regularly
volume
now,
has the most non-superhero spy stuff. You
right?
know, like I mean, she
The
jumps from a building.
projection.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's right.
I
The
was like, what? Wait, what decade is this?
yeah, yeah,
I'm
exactly.
like, yeah, that I found stretching credibility. Like, what I
That's a tough one
all I
in
asked
terms of.
myself is, would I have believed that in a Roger Moore movie?
That's actually a really good barometer. That's because that's the
Right.
era we're
Like,
in here.
think of
Yeah.
the technology in the Roger Moore Bond movies.
Hmm.
No way is someone standing in
Yeah.
the room with a hologram. Maybe
Yeah.
like they're across the globe and they're projecting a hologram, but to have like real time holograph technology, no,
Yeah.
come on.
That's a tough one. That's a tough one. But yeah, I mean, it's
That's
one thing for her to,
believable enough to be
yeah,
like, have your guard down facing the
like,
hologram. Yeah, come on.
like that's the kind of thing you would see in one of the more recent Mission Impossibles.
Oh my gosh.
Not
Yeah.
but not in the Mission Impossible TV series. You know,
Yes.
So you're right. That one does stretch in terms of tech, but yeah, it's one thing to see Velvet use the squirrel suit to jump from building to building. But like here, she jumps from a building like across traffic and catches up to a high speed car chase. Like that one
And
is
it's going
like,
too fast.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's right. She says so. She's going faster than the cars in the chase now. Like that's a little bit of like, okay, like what are we doing here? So I think again, this volume, and again, also she manages to infiltrate the White House, and then kidnap the president.
she talks about she did more heist planning for breaking into her old office building to go through files than
Yeah,
she did
yeah.
for the White House
Yeah,
here.
she just happens to she's already set up in the bathroom. Like
And
she
I
knows which bathroom she's going to run to, like
Yeah.
you
Eh,
know, so
So I was just like, okay, maybe
yeah,
he's just like, yeah, I've done all the in-depth, like, this is how she analyzes a building and makes a
yeah,
plan. You've seen that. I'm not going to bore you with it again.
it could
Just
be,
believe
could be.
me, here it is at
Yeah.
the next level.
Yeah.
Um,
But
can
again,
we talk
there's
about,
a lot of superhero stuff here. There's
oh my gosh.
this is the
Yeah.
most again. This is where we move away from the superhero stuff that James Bond can do, and we move into more again to repeat the superhero stuff that Ethan Hunt can do. You know, that level of non-powered human ability. You know, that an action star, that Mission Impossible franchise versus whatever ridiculous stuff that James Bond can do. There's a it may be a faint line, but there's a line of demarcation between those two types of heroes, and here we see more of the action hero stuff, more of the larger budget stuff. You know,
Yeah.
we've entered Michael
So
Bay territory in this book.
that's true.
Yeah,
And you don't want to stay there very long.
not very long. Yeah.
Um, okay. So if Velvet is Batman,
Okay.
Damian Lake is the Joker.
No, Damian Lake would be.
I mean, two faces, oh, two on the nose. But to
It,
me, it
it really
seems
would be Two
like,
Face though, because it is someone who has a relationship with our protagonist, um, who is working both sides, who has genuine feelings and affection for them. Doesn't actually want them to get hurt, but it's really more just using them. Um,
yeah, I was
he
like,
could
I
be
couldn't
Hush. He could
tell
be
if,
Hush. I don't know.
yeah, I was like, I can't tell if he's really clever or if he's basically an agent of chaos who just sees which way the wind is drifting and opens his sails and goes that way.
Oh,
Um,
I think he might be a little bit of both. I think in his last moments when he's talking with Director Manning in that safe house, um, it I got the sense from the way that Manning kind of scolds him is that like, yes, we accomplished essentially what we wanted here, but that Manning that Lake went off script a couple times, like when he killed the when he killed the former head of the French station, you know,
right.
when he used Velvet as bait there. I get the sense that that wasn't supposed to happen in the way that it went down, and that was just like being like, no, I needed revenge. You know, so there's a little bit of chaos agent, but also um, they're still working towards the same goal. But it's like you can only control him so much. So I think it's a little bit of both.
Okay. Yeah, because I was just like, oh, I feel no about this guy. I was like, what in the Severus Snape is happening with this guy?
Yeah.
Like, both sides are convinced he's a double agent. Um, Velvet has a low level of trust. Especially, I mean, I was amazed how quickly she turned on him. She's like, oh, he double crossed me, he used me, whatever. I'm like, I mean, he just knocked you out, put you in a trunk where you could easily escape, and killed everyone that was guarding you. I'm
Well,
pretty
but
sure he did right by you as far as like uh what spies owe each other.
yeah, I guess, but I think that was more of a revelation of like, um, seeing kind of how out of her depth she was. Again, the idea that she was used, she thought she was in control of the game, as we talked about last week, but she just finds out that no, she's just a pawn in someone else's game. Um, but I mean, the idea of leaving her alive, as you find out, like that was the whole point. You know, they never wanted her to die. They wanted her to find the information, so they would come to her. She would come to them to then like join them. Which as she lays out, like you had me murder my husband, and now you want me to work for you. Like this idea, seems rather ridiculous. But that was the plan, the capital P plan, the overall deal with setting her on this path. But I think we see with the American spy, the wonderfully named Maximilian Dark, uh, that she now she's playing like 9D chess at this point, and she talks about how she knows that he's informing on her, but she has to keep him close and fool him into thinking that he's doing his job and not being played. We get that from Velvet's narration, that she has to play the role in a way where um she can still be in control, but give the illusion of control to him, that he's the one making decisions, he's the one spying on her, that he's the one that knows more of what's going on than she does. When in actuality, she's the one playing both sides. So we at least see that evolution in her character, where now, yeah, she understands that every move she makes, I think she says that too, every move she makes has to be two moves, has to be the move that she wants to make and the move that she is given the appearance to make, so she can get the reaction that she needs from the people she needs it from, while also hiding whatever her true agenda is. And so I think we see her after what Lake does to her, and does betray her, but leaves her alive. You're right, but she is more on guard. She's more on her game now, and we see that in this arc of her, you know, figuring out what trust means to her. And at this point, it's just trusting is just, I can only trust you in so much as however I can use you,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll buy it. I mean, yeah. I just thought I would have liked, I don't know. You know how they do the little 3-page teaser before the chapter begins?
Mm-hmm. Let the
Give
cold
me,
open.
give me a cold open on him. Just 3 pages of his thought process or his conversation with someone else.
Lake's thought process, right? You're talking about?
Yeah, Lake. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And that, like, and I did say this in jest earlier. And this is not a knock on Steve Epting's art, but I did find it hard to start distinguishing white dudes, old white men with like trench coats. I was like,
Well,
there's
yeah.
only
Oh,
so
yeah.
much you could do to differentiate them.
Well, yeah.
But
I think Damian Lake has the longer hair. Manning
yeah,
has
he
the
was
bald and the
easier.
beard, and he's larger. I do think
Manning, the
between
director. Yeah.
yeah, but between Colt, um, Simmons, Dark, yeah, all of the male spies who are like Velvet's contemporaries, uh, 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 Damian Lake and Director Manning, like they're the generation above her, right? So all the people that are her contemporaries, all those male spies, yeah, they're all pretty similar. Like, oh, this is the guy that's got a little gray on the temple. Okay, which one was that again? So yeah, there's a lot of that. But I mean, that's a bunch
That's
of regular
70s
looking white
spy
dudes.
stuff. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what they look like. So, I guess Colt was a little younger. Again, he has kind of the Steve McQueen look, um, like with the turtleneck and things like that. I think about Bullet. But yeah, there's a level of, I don't know, same faciness to it. But again,
Again, it's not a criticism of Steve. It's just a criticism of, I, you know, uh, the lack of diversity in the cast
yeah.
is perhaps part of the period piece of it all.
Oh,
Um,
I would agree. I think that would probably be their argument is too. Because again, as we talked about, the
yeah, and I'm not saying in any
the
way
specific,
that
yeah,
Ed
the
Brubaker has failed
no,
anyone or
no,
done
no,
a bad
no.
job. I'm just like, yeah, I've kind of grown accustomed to reading stories where people have different skin tones and
Yeah,
different haircuts and facial features, and
yeah,
uh, especially for a visual medium where, if you're reading a novel or a book, it always says so and so said blank, and it's like
yeah.
whether you have a visual image of them or not, you always know who's talking, who's saying what. And some of these people in rooms talking, I found I it wasn't as intuitive to follow who's speaking as versus the internal monologue. The lettering and the color of the boxes, teed me off to all that stuff. So
Again, the whatever the gender and race politics of the early 70s, um, plays into what the story is. Um, not a lot of diversity going on
in
in
the CIA,
MI6.
right?
Yeah, and or which is why focusing on the big twist here is that we're focusing on the woman who was the secretary, who just happens to also be a spy, but like you weren't getting that in the Roger Moore, at least very few. I guess um Spy Who Loved Me, I guess, the Barbara Bach character, Agent Triple X. But like, there's, all the diversity in the Bond movies are not Bond's colleagues. you know?
And usually pretty offensive.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And they're usually always the bad guys. So, at least here, I guess, so point one here that, who are the bad guys here? The bad guys here are also the old white men, so they're
Right.
the good guys and the bad guys here. At least there's no bad 70s caricature of minority characters. So it at least has that going for it.
That's true. It did dodge that bullet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so, yeah, anyway, I mean, overall, I feel like we're ragging on this probably more than we mean to. Let's talk about this title, The Man Who Stole the World.
Yeah. Who is the man?
Yeah. It's
Because
like,
it is men. It's singular. It's not men who
did
stole the
it
world.
turn out to be Nixon? Did it turn out to be Ford? Did it turn out to be the director?
I
Is it Lake? Surely not Lake.
it, if I had a power rank, I
Yes,
actually I
please
honestly
power rank.
I hadn't thought about this. Um,
Really, we've been spending so much time on the title each week.
I
I
know
just
that
thought it
that
was
is
going to be
true.
the first thing out of the gate.
Well, because we talked about the other ones that they're effectively nonsense titles.
Well,
Um,
that's also a strong candidate in the running here.
that is
This,
true. That
this
is
could
true.
be a
It,
nonsense title.
if I had, because again, it is a play on the man who sold the world.
Right.
Um, the Dave Bowie song. If it had to point to one person, I think I would go with director Manning. He seemed to be the ringleader of this inner circle of older espionage professionals. Again, this small cabal of the secret organization within the secret organization. So I would lean towards that, in terms of maybe not having stole the world, but having wanted to steal the world, because that seemed to be their goal, right? Their goal was to be the people behind the power to direct the world in the way that they thought it should go. So I,
Yeah.
I think the fact that it's singular, if it was the men who stole the world, then it's like, oh well, it's the group that they're trying to recruit Velvet to. But because it's singular, and I think that's meant to simply be a play on the song title, I would say it was director Manning.
I
Um,
think so too. And I think you realize how much power he has. So let me get this straight. X-14, the only man she ever loved,
well,
was
no, no,
basic.
that was that
Oh,
X14.
Mockingbird.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Right.
yeah. X14 was,
Mockingbird.
yeah, Mockingbird was her husband who she killed in the 50s. X14 was, but just another agent, a very good agent that she knew. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Mockingbird, the only man she ever loved, was killed basically on accident and like, or at least unnecessarily. And this guy's like, yeah, I wish that hadn't happened, but what are you gonna do? Not run the world? And she's like, okay, you're gonna die now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's
Yeah.
basically the resolution, right?
It,
It's
it,
like
it
we
was pretty much,
realize
yeah,
this guy has so much power that there's literally no accountability, even to his own conscience, really.
yeah.
And I think that has to be the man who stole the world.
Because I don't think he believes Velvet's going to shoot him until he's actually shot.
Yeah, he doesn't seem to believe it even
Yeah.
shortly
even though
after he's
even
been
though
shot.
she comes into the room pointing a gun at him, lowers her gun, and then brings it back up again. Even
Yeah,
that
it's
second
wild.
time, yeah, even that second time, I don't think he believes. Like truly, I don't think he believes that she's going to pull the trigger. I think he feels that his case is so strong of why you should work with us because you've seen the way the world actually works and we can make it so much better. And she's just like, no, like I don't care about any of that. Like you ruined my life on multiple occasions, and so you have to die now. So yeah, I think it's Manning. I think it's his level of hubris. Is what they're referring to.
Got it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Well, I mean, that exhausts all my notes. I mean, I wanted to go out on something more positive. Please tell me you have one last note that will reel us
I don't know.
back into the realm
Well,
of the positive.
it's not positive, I guess. So the one thing I noticed here, and I don't know if this was planned or not, but so um issue 11 is the last issue that has letters in it. Issue 12 has a page which is just like a text from Brubaker, which is kind of the normal things he has. about talking about like, here's what I'm working on, here's things I'm watching, here's what's coming up next, blah blah. But there are no actual letters. 13 and 14 don't have letters at all. And then 15, there is just a letter at the back where he very much specifically says like he apologized for delays. So the one thing we hadn't talked about was that this book was never really a monthly book. It always was kind of like maybe it was once a month, and then it was every 2 months, and then sometimes 3 months. It had a real random schedule for a variety of reasons. I don't think Steve Epting is the fastest guy. Brubaker had a lot of stuff going on here. In the middle of this, he joined the writers' room at Westworld at HBO, so he's doing other Hollywood things. I think issue 11 to 15, those 5 issues, I think took 11 months to come out. So like almost a whole year for just 5 issues there. But it ends with that him saying that, hey, we've got more Velvet news we can't talk about now. Steve and I are working on stuff, blah, 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 blah.
That's impressive. They've been really tight-lipped about it.
Yeah.
For a long time.
So Velvet 15 comes out at the end of July in 2016. August 2016, beginning of August 2016, Killer Be Kill #1 drop. And the only new material that Brubaker has done since has only been with Sean Phillips, whether it's a single issue like Killer Be Killed or going back to Criminal or any of the original graphic novels. He hasn't worked with anyone else. Steve Epting went back to doing just a bunch of for hire stuff at Marvel, stuff at DC, kind of mini runs here and there, mini series. So I don't know what became of these plans, if they'll ever come back to it. But at the end of 15, he specifically says, reach the end of our first big Velvet story. Like that's the way he leaves that issue and that arc. So yeah, I don't know what the plan was. I don't know what's happened since then to where they're not going to go back to it. I wonder at what point maybe they hit like they crossed the Rubicon and were like, well, now it's been so many years, we can't go back to it now. Like, all right, like in 2018, they're still talking about it 2 years later. And then 29, and then like, well, has it been too long? Can we go back? I don't know. And then more years pass by. I don't know what it is. But it seemed very clear that at the end of 15 that they weren't done and they were going to come back to it at some point. And it just never happened. And it has never happened. That said, if next week they were like, hey, guess what? We're coming back with Velvet Volume 2. And even if it's a new #1 now, whatever, I'll be in a second. I'll be there. I'll pre-order right then and there. So at this point, though, I just don't think it's going to happen. You get to a certain point where it maybe doesn't make any sense to go back to it. So I don't know. And like I said, ever since then, all the work that Ed Brubaker has done has been drawn by Sean Phillips now. And obviously I love that pairing, my favorite creative team in all of comics. But this is one of those stories, one of those loose threads that is out there that I would just, oh God, if they went back to it, I'd be so happy. Especially because it wasn't intended to be the absolute end, even though it functions as an end because it's the end of this one story. It was never meant to be the end. So I don't know. It's just I get bummed when I think about it too, because even though maybe the specifics of this third arc weren't my favorite. Overall, I love the world that they built. I love this character. I love what they did with her. I love just everything about what they showed us in Velvet Templeton. And I want to see more stories and more adventures, more things with that, because that's a character that I just think is awesome. And they put the time and the work in to give her a story that I'm invested in. A characterization that I'm invested in. And I want to go back to that. I want to get more of that. And it's just, at some point, I just kind of gave up hope that I ever get more Velvet stories, and that bums me out. But, I'm at least glad that we have a complete story to read, that these 15 issues do create a complete story, even if it is just one story and not potentially 2 or 3 stories, which would have been awesome.
Yeah. Well, I've got a name for that kind of hope. It's called Morning Glory Hope.
Yeah. Well, it's the same kind of thing. The same kind of thing. But at least that
if I
at
ever get
least
to
that went
write,
50 issues though. That went 50 issues. That went a
that
long
actually
time.
makes it
So
feel worse to me that
it
they
kind of
didn't
does.
finish.
Because it
That
went on so long. Yeah.
right, you
Yeah.
went 50 issues, and we're
Yeah.
like, oh, wait till we come back. You're really
Yeah.
we're gonna explain it all. This
Yeah.
very confusing series.
Yeah.
That'd be like if Lost ended at the end of season two. It was just like, don't you worry. We're gonna make sure you understand what these numbers mean,
Yeah.
what the little hole in the ground means.
And then it never
You'll
came
totally
back.
understand the polar bear. Yeah, it just never came back. Um, which, honestly, lets people run wild. Yeah, eventually you and I will be scraping the bottom of the barrel for old books to go through while we're waiting for another series to finish. And I think we'll probably do a binge of Morning Glories.
At some point it'll happen. We'll get down to a point where, yeah, there'll be nothing else to talk about.
I mean, it's like it's hard to imagine though with so many great comics coming out all the time.
Yeah.
On the other hand, there are like at least three series I'm waiting for them to end and then like make sure they're actually ended before I bring them on the
Want to
podcast.
talk about them? Yeah, yeah. We do want to make sure they've reached an end, so they're not fully open ended. But yeah, I mean, again, this is, I if you had asked me a couple years ago, I would say, yeah, Velvet's over for now. Now I'm at the point where no, this is the book we have, and if they ever went back to it, I think it would be in the manner that I said. It would be there was something number one. It'd be Velvet colon something, and they wouldn't come back with 16. It'd be a new number one, which would be fine. I would love it. And it would be onboarding for new readers. There'd be some sort of recap of what the previous adventure was. And I'd live through that because I mean it would mean I have more story.
I mean, hear
You
me
know?
out. And I think I suggested this for The Good Asian as well. But now that you've done this kind of like, here's the origin story in this other, like you could do 100-page OGNs
Well,
for
yeah,
like new adventures
and
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 treat it like reckless, treat it
and
like,
and that's the thing that actually would make perfect sense for Ed Brubaker's audience because yes, it's not Brubaker and Phillips, but it's still him, you know. And I don't know if Steve Epting would want to work that way, but if they came out, yeah, with just an OGN and like here's the full story, here's 140 pages of the next Velvet story, um, it would work because Ed Brubaker is the one writer that's figured out how that works. Now, is that only because it's Brubaker and Phillips? I don't know. But other creators and creative teams have tried the graphic novel route with varying levels of success. But that honestly has that varying level of success, I believe, has less to do with the quality of the story and the material, and everything to do with the creators.
yeah,
Brubaker and Phillips have a stamp. They have an audience that they know they can put this out and it's going to sell because it's them. Versus another creative team that I absolutely love, which is Marjorie Liu and Sana Takada, who are the team behind Monstrous, which is a great book that comes out. They do arcs and take breaks, but they have an OGN series going out called The Night Eaters, which is very, very good. But it doesn't get the acclaim or it doesn't get the sales that Brubaker and Phillips get because they're not Brubaker and Phillips. So if Brubaker and Epting came out and said this is the next volume of Velvet, I think it would totally do well because the Brubaker audience is already set for that. People mistakenly think that Velvet is a Brubaker and Phillips book anyway.
right.
So the fact that he has, as a writer alone, has that built-in audience of people like me who buy anything that he writes. I'm sure most of his audience has read his work with non-Sean Phillips artists. Most of them have. I would hope if you're a Brubaker and Phillips fan that you've read Velvet and you've confused Steve Epting with Sean Phillips, but you've read it because it's Ed Brubaker. So yeah, if they came out with an OGN with the next adventure for Velvet, I would so be in for that. And that would be probably at this point ideal for the character. You know, one volume, one mission. You know,
Right.
one
Yeah.
story. You know, versus again
And
the
not to
15
mention that
issue.
like comic
Yeah.
sales do a lot better for like trades and graphic novels right now than single issues anyway.
Yeah. I mean,
So,
so he can make a splash in that because it's just it's another OGN from Ed Brubaker. You know, this is what he does now. Because I think he's even talked about it. I don't think it's specific to Sean Phillips, where they're just kind of out on the single issue. You know, and I think part of that is how he works with Sean Phillips in terms of how he writes and how Phillips returns pages. So whether or not he could replicate that with another artist, but like another artist, but not a new artist, an artist that he knows and has worked with before. So maybe maybe Steve Epting doesn't work that way. I don't know, but I mean, I would love that if that's how they said this is how we're going to do Velvet stories going forward. But they didn't say when they were coming out. But like, yes, we're going to do them. I would love that. That would be the perfect format for more stories from this universe.
yep, 100%. Great. Well, any other thoughts on series before we close out?
No, I don't think so. I liked going into the espionage genre. I like seeing this kind of.
It's a nice change of pace. I
It
mean,
is.
we've
It is.
been
Yeah.
so deep in sci-fi lately.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think our next, no spoilers, but our next series will be into dystopia, which is technically an area we haven't touched directly. I mean, there's been quasi dystopia stuff.
Yeah. But a lot of that's like dystopian future mixed with sci-fi.
Yes.
So,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, no, it was fun to visit this genre. Again, it's a genre that you and I both love. And to get from a perspective and a different kind of character, it's a fun story. This is a book that I had reread a number of times. I hadn't in a couple of years.
This is probably your first time reading it since coming to terms with the fact that it's done.
Yeah. I think I probably reread it definitely pre-2020, so maybe like 2018, 2019, when it was still a couple of years out. And it's like, hey, maybe there's a chance that it can still come back. That was probably the last time I read it. It's probably been 3 or 4 years since I had read it again, but I had read it probably 2 or 3 times in the first 2 or 3 years that it finished up. So revisiting it here was a lot of fun. It reminds me how much I like the character, how much I like the world that Brubaker and Epting built.
Yep. Awesome. All right. Well, great recommendation on this one. And I think you originally were talking to me about this series on local comic shop day or free comic shop day.
Free comic day, probably. Yeah.
Yeah. And our store was doing buy 2 trades, get 1 free.
Mm-hmm.
I feel my investment has finally paid for itself. And I'm, and those are like ones that I'm keeping on the shelf. And then shortly after that, I found them all for $1 an issue at half price books, and I bought them all that way too. So
there's you could find. So
because
I've seen the deluxe oversized. The deluxe, it's a nice deluxe oversized.
That's how I wanted Kill or Be Killed, but man, it's expensive now.
Well, yeah, so it's hard to find now. So maybe you can find a nicer one in half price book somewhere, one that isn't all beat up. So
I'm better off finding single issues, honestly, but.
Yeah, maybe so.
Anyway, all right. Well, we will see you all next time. Thank you for listening to Velvet. Hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. And, should Velvet ever return, we will be here to talk about that.
100%. Yep.
All right. See ya.
Peace.